Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of Colonial Delusions, where we explore where land-grabbing, culture-snatching, history-concocting, genocide-denying colonialists get the audacity. I actually have no idea where they get the audacity. But what I do know is that time and time again, European colonialists severely underestimate the unbreakable resolve and unwavering faith of those that they occupy. So deep was Europe's trauma in fighting poorly armed civilians that many times these legendary warriors lived up to the iconic names that became a part of their historical persona. We all grew up watching the acclaimed film, The Lion of the Desert, the story of the great Libyan Islamic scholar and anti-colonial resistance fighter, Omar Mukhtar. What made this film such a classic was not the cinematography, nor the Oscar-worthy acting of its cast members. Rather, the producers of this film not only depicted the barbarity of the Italian colonial occupation of Libya in great detail, but intricately wove in the real-life experiences and words of Omar Mukhtar, bringing the magnanimity of his character and spirit to life. Let's take it back a bit. Born in the village of Zawiyat Janzur in or around the year of 1860, Omar Mukhtar was orphaned at a tender age. Before his passing, his father entrusted young Omar to the prominent scholar and family friend Sharif al-Ghariani, who took it upon himself to raise the boy upon the path of righteousness and knowledge. Embarking on this noble endeavor, Omar Mukhtar dedicated much of his youth towards the study of sacred knowledge, a path that took him to the northeastern town of Jagboub. There, he studied with the renowned Sanusi University, graduating as a prolific scholar and a highly trained imam. It also comes to no surprise that the great man was shortly initiated into the Sanusi Sufi order. Now, before we continue with the life and times of Omar Mukhtar, a brief look at the origins of the Sanusi order is needed. The Sanusi order was a prominent Sufi brotherhood born in Libya in the late 1830s. Led by its founder, Sidi Muhammad Ali al-Sanusi, the Sanusis became a force to be reckoned with the advent of colonialism. By the turn of the 20th century, the Zawiyas of the Sanusi order were well established across Libya, Egypt, and as far as the Hijaz in Arabia. At the ripe age of 39 years old, Omar Mukhtar joined his Sanusi brothers in Chad to fight against the French colonial occupation. In 1911, the Italians invaded Libya under the pretense of a weakened Ottoman polity losing its hold on power in the region. This triggered the Italian-Ottoman War, in which notable Ottoman pashas such as Enver Pasha and Mustafa Kemal fought in Libya to preserve the Ottoman presence. By 1922, the fascist Italian regime of Benito Mussolini embarked on an expansionist, genocidal rampage to occupy even more Libyan territory. Almost immediately did the Sanusi Brotherhood take up arms to rid their homeland of the fascist invaders. No, the Italians were not any different when it came to following Europe's imperial playbook to the T. By 1929, not only did the Italian invaders forcibly dispossess and displace entire populations from their lands, they enforced blockades to prevent local support for the resistance movement. But of course, there is no crime too inhumane for the colonizer. In addition to the mass murder of innocent civilians in these death camps, the occupation forces would routinely poison water wells, confiscate livestock from rural families, and publicly execute resistance fighters. Now, the vileness of the colonial logic often meant that occupation forces would weaponize a variety of depraved tactics to crush all forms of resistance. The weapon of choice for the Italians in Libya? Concentration camps. Just in the Italian-occupied region of Cyrenaica, it is estimated that 110,000, nearly two-thirds of the population, were sent to what scholars and legal experts have labeled as death camps. Men, women, young and old, were forcibly marched out to the scorching Saharan desert all the way to the Egyptian border. The Italians had already built a several-mile-long fence to prevent any aid, resources, or even a means of escape for those innocent civilians. This was effectively a death sentence. The harsh desert climate, the lack of water and food, combined with the squalid conditions of the camp, resulted in several thousands of deaths. After many years of fighting with his brothers against the colonial forces in Chad, the now seasoned fighter Omar Mukhtar joined the anti-colonial resistance against the fascist Italians at the age of 53. His knowledge of the desert warfare and military genius was unmatched. The Italians, however, were like a fish out of water. The inhospitable Libyan deserts and their inability to navigate such terrain was not their only challenge. Support for the Sanusi Brotherhood was fierce. Wherever Omar Mukhtar and his men went, they were honored, celebrated, and provided with an abundance of material support. For 20 long years, Mukhtar and his battle-hardened men dragged the Italians from one humiliating defeat to another. "We do not surrender," he said. "We win or we die." Unable to outmaneuver Mukhtar on the battlefield, the Italians resorted to targeting and destroying his supply lines whilst violently suppressing his local supporters. It was only after years of humiliation that the Italians managed to ambush and capture Omar Mukhtar on the 11th of September 1931. After a 3-day bogus trial, Omar Mukhtar was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. Upon hearing this verdict, this great man of God, unmoved by the news of his impending death, responded, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." From God we came, and to God we must return. On the 16th of September, at the fragile age of 73 years old, Omar Mukhtar was brought to Suluk concentration camp to be executed in front of his supporters. His battle-worn hands, whose wrinkles told stories of his victories, were chained to his feet. His traditional white shrouds were draped over him, a symbolic goodbye signaling his inevitable departure from this world. With the noose fitted around his neck, Omar Mukhtar took one last glance at his people. His stern yet composed demeanor spoke louder than 1,000 words. Here stands a man who died before he met death, a dignified man who offered his life for justice before it was unjustly taken from him. Omar Mukhtar was executed before the weary eyes of his people with the aim of weakening their morale. However, little did the Italians know that with his execution, they fate. The life and legacy of this great warrior and scholar would ignite a revolutionary fire in the hearts of the Libyan people, which brought forth waves of resistance that broke the chains of colonialism. We do not surrender. We win or we die. Take a moment to let those words sink in. These profound words, which became the mantra of resistance, unveiled a strength, a resolve, a way of living and being in this world that frustrates the colonizer. This unbreakable spirit of resilience that we are currently witnessing in the Palestinian struggle baffles the Western colonial mind. How is it that in the face of such devastation, brutality, and seemingly endless injustice, that these people remain so dignified, so fearless in the face of their oppressors? How is it that a person, after losing everything worth living for in this life, looks you in the eyes and says, "God is enough for me"? What separates people like this, men and women like Omar Mukhtar, from the colonizer is exactly this. The colonizer fights not for greater virtue or meaning. The absence of moral consciousness is why pleas to their humanity are futile. They live but hollow lives, and in their denial of God and His judgment, they kill, plunder, and desecrate all that is sacred to fill their insatiable greed for wealth, power, and domination. This is why they can carry out the most depraved acts of violence and oppression, and with the utmost audacity, they demand that their victims prove their humanity. On the other hand, a man like Omar Mukhtar, dignified not by his status or wealth, but by his faith, a man of pristine moral courage in the face of callousness and depravity. The source of his indomitable spirit was unquestionably his conviction in Islam, his refusal to surrender, though seemingly powerless against his occupiers.